Welcome to Average Joe's Drive, your weekly podcast of movies, music, games, and other things entertainment related. Now, your host, TJ Washburn.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Average Joe's Drive-In. I am your host, TJ Washburn, and with me this week is Shawn French. Shawn, how you doing?
Good, how you doing?
No, not too bad. How's things going down Portland way?
Good. Busy.
Yeah, you seem like a busy guy. I know we had to kind of bounce around a little bit to find a time to get you in because you've got a lot on your plate right now, so deadlines and all that. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you're up to?
I'm a writer who lives in southern Maine, and I've done a little bit of everything. I made a horror movie called The Wrong House 8 or 9 years back, in which my wife and I played serial killers that hunt down the little bastards who robbed us, and we filmed it immediately after an actual break-in at our house. So that was wonderfully cathartic.
Yeah,
a fun experience.
I could see that being very much so.
And I read a comic book series called Escape from Jesus Island that I co-created with Mortimer Glum, who's another artist from Maine. And it's about an attempt to clone Jesus that goes horribly wrong and unleashes the Antichrist. And the Vatican Black Ops try and swarm in and steal him. At the same time, the Antichrist is leading a mutant rebellion, and everything goes to hell. And now I currently pay the bills as a video game writer. And my first game, Epic Tavern, comes out on Steam Early Access on September 7th, which is like crazy soon.
Yeah, it's next Wednesday?
Yeah. Thursday, I think.
Thursday. Yeah.
Don't take a day away from me at this point.
Yeah, I don't want to stress you out any more than I'm sure you already are, trying to get all the glitches and bugs and last-minute tinkering stuff done, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. And the good thing is, we were putting it out through Steam. We'll have regular updates, so it's not like, you burn a disc and send it and that's your game.
Right.
We'll have updates, probably multiple times a week for the first few weeks, and then, weekly or bi-weekly beyond that.
That's one beautiful thing that I love about Steam is a lot of times you do get the early access, and it not only gives the gamers a chance to test the games out, play them a little bit, but it also gives the developers a little bit of a chance to get some feedback, maybe catch a few things they didn't before, they get the full-blown crazy release for, everything.
Yeah, and we rely on, already we have a small group of alpha testers who backed the project on Kickstarter originally. And we handpicked a few of those, or I think they were raffled, of our alpha testers, and we pore over every bit of feedback we get from them. So one of the things that's going to be really valuable when we go up to a wider audience is just getting that feedback on which parts of the game are working for them and where they want us to expand. Because we have so many, just wide-ranging plans that would take us years and years and years to get to everything. Right. So we're going to rely on the fans to kind of tell us where we should start. What are the aspects they want to see us build on first.
Right. Yeah, and that absolutely makes sense, especially on a project of this scale. Like I've gone on Steam and checked out some of the the snapshots and stuff up on the page, and from what I'm getting, it looks like kind of like that old school RPG, turn-based RPG is the type of vibe I'm getting from it. Is that?
Yeah, it's a roster management RPG.
Okay.
So you're running a medieval tavern and basically serving as the agent for a dozen or more adventurers. So jobs come in and you're kind of assembling the crew of adventurers and equipping them that you think are best suited to solve that mission. So it's kind of like a fantasy football or fantasy baseball, except it's fantasy.
Right.
It's kind of like a sports management game, but with wizards and dragons.
Yeah, that's kind of a different twist on doing it. That's not really something I've heard of before.
Yeah, it's crazy ambitious because it's really a couple very different games in one. Half the game takes place in a tavern itself, where you're serving food and drinks to a bar full of adventurers, and every interaction increases your relationship with them. And that unlocks like new pieces of their bio. They may unlock new skills. They may offer to join you on quests. And some of the biggest quest chains in the game are written specifically about certain characters that only unlock when you get to know them really well. So there's lots of really interesting stuff to dig into in the tavern itself. And then we've got a whole other half of the game which takes place on the world map, where you have multiple parties, 5 or 6 at a time, traveling out to all these different areas and hitting encounters on the way while trying to accomplish their overall mission. And there are dungeons where you have to complete a certain number of stages to escape. So there's a ton of variability that happens beyond just the quests themselves from all the things that can happen to you while you're traveling.
Yeah, that definitely sounds really ambitious, and
yeah, it's crazy.
That's a lot of. I can see that, but it that kind of reminds me, like, I guess if you took like one of my favorite old school RPGs was Shining Force, which was one of my absolute favorites, and then it sounds like you've taken that and kind of coupling it with something like Second Life, almost a kind of, that sort of mixture, I guess, is what it seems like to me. Maybe I'm a little off there, but that kind of seems like the general idea or general impression I'm getting.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of especially in the stuff that I've written, it's kind of a love letter to the traditional RPGs that we all grew up with.
Yeah.
A lot of the quests are kind of having some fun with some of the standard tropes of RPGs, and others are giant sprawling epics where characters are getting killed and horrible things are happening. So there's really a nice mix of the kind of serious and the lots of just quirky weirdness.
Yeah, so there's a little something for everybody that's a fan of like that old school RPG mixed with the new then.
Yes, yeah. And we had a crew of 4 writers, which with almost a 30-year age range between them.
Oh, wow.
So you get a nice mix of voices in there too, which was, I think, really helpful.
Oh, for sure, because then you're not just getting something from somebody younger or somebody older. You're balancing out, so each one of those writers is probably bringing a whole different perspective to the writing style of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very cool. You said that's going to be. Can you pre-order it right now on Steam?
What you can do right now on Steam that helps a huge amount is follow and wishlist us.
Okay.
It'll be available for purchase on September 7th.
Okay. Excellent. So if you're into RPGs, then please go and do that, and show some support to Shawn and the team that's working on the game. I know I definitely am interested to try it out and give it a shot. I've been dying for something new, and I'm kind of burnt out on the multiplayer first-person shooter stuff, and I actually went back not that long ago and started. I got the Genesis emulator on Steam, so I'm playing.
Excellent.
I went back and started playing Shining Force again, which I probably beat about 5 times back, in the Genesis days, but.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've played it, so and I picked up a few other games for it. I played Gauntlet for a little while the other day, and just some stuff like that. So yeah, that sounds like something like I'm currently in the mood for that sort of thing. So I know I'll definitely be checking it out. So
very cool.
Now I've had a chance to read a little bit of Escape from Jesus Island, and
yeah.
It's an interesting concept. It's very different from any of the stuff that I've seen. Just not only like in the storyline, but also in the approach to the artwork for it as well. And so, how did the whole Jesus Island thing come about?
It's a story I've been obsessed with for almost 25 years. I first wrote it as a short film. It was just like a straight comedy. It was almost like a Scooby-Doo episode. And I did it when I was a stand-up comic at the time. And I did a bit about it in my act for a while, and then just kind of, it was just kind of a funny idea, the notion that an attempt to clone Jesus goes horribly wrong, and unleashes hordes of mutant Jizai. So I just kind of let it go. It was a bit I did, and I tried to forget about it, but it just stuck around. And the more the idea played in my head, the more I realized there was actually a good story there. There was some interesting, kind of interesting material to play with. And it was when I teamed up with Mortimer Glum, the artist who co-created it with me, that was when we realized that it's actually the story of Revelation. And it's just using cloning, from the Bible. And it's just using cloning as the catalyst for the rise of the Antichrist and the return of Jesus. And once I realized that as blasphemous as it seems on the surface, that it's actually the story from the back of the Bible, I studied the hell out of Revelation and really crafted the story to make sure it matched.
Yeah.
Because that kind of became my armor against the criticism.
Right. Oh, and I can imagine with a title like that in the subject matter that you probably have gotten some blowback for just even attempting to tackle that, whole subject matter. So.
Oh, it's been hilarious. Early on, I had someone tell me that he hoped I got cancer of the AIDS, which I thought was nice.
Wow. Yeah.
So I get some nice emails sometimes. It's good to hear from fans.
Yeah. Any press is good press,
Yeah, there have been a couple times at conventions where I thought someone was going to take a swing.
They've got that upset about it.
Yeah. Well, we're like I was standing up behind the table to talk to them, so I'd be in a better defensive position. There are some people who get really, really upset about it, which seems silly to me, but whatever.
I agree. I completely agree with you there. People have a tendency to get offended about all sorts of things. Especially when it comes to that. That can be.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not like that snuck up on us, though.
Oh yeah,
We knew coming in. I've been hearing for 25 years. Whenever I've mentioned the story I wanted to do, everyone's response is, "You can't do that."
Right.
And I'm like, "Well, I can. Sure, I can." And they're like, "Well, you can't call it Escape from Jesus Island." And I'm like, "Yeah, watch me." So
the name is copyrighted, Jesus is a trademark character of Marvel Studios. You can't use him, Yeah, that's and I can see from reading the issues that I have read of it. I mean, I'm not saying that it would be right for anybody but to get pissed off, but I can see somebody that is in that sort of mindset would easily overlook the fact, like you were mentioning, that it's basically the Book of Revelations, and they just overlook that whole thing. And
Oh yeah, I mean, I get it. It's also a super gory horror comic.
Oh, definitely there.
There's no disguising that. It's a violent and profane and
it was actually I actually met you at a comic convention. That was when I first talked to you. Was Bang Pop, I think.
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago.
Yep.
And that was when I first met you, and that's where I originally picked up my episodes of my copies of Escape from Jesus Island.
Yeah.
Got chatting with you, and it was just funny that in the last couple of years I've got to know you a little bit more through different conventions and networking through people that we both know, and so so it's just it's kind of weird that was the catalyst of us kind of getting to know each other was Escape through Jesus Island. So yeah,
it's true. Well, it's actually as offended as some folks who have been by its very existence, it's opened a lot of doors for me. I mean, the video game job I have now is a direct result. They had read the comic,
right,
and that helped a lot because I didn't have. I didn't have. This is my first video game gig, even though I've been trying for 40 years to get one.
Right.
So I didn't have the background in video games that almost everybody else in the crew did. Because Hyperkinetic Studios, who I'm working with, they were formed by several of the creative team from the Spider-Man 2 game.
Okay.
That one that was just crazy awesome and had the swinging mechanics that were just madness. So a group of them went and started their own team. That's Hyperkinetic Studios. So they've all worked on, giant games, Call of Duty and Deus Ex and that kind of stuff. So for a scrub like me to somehow claw his way onto the team required being able to show that I could actually, tell a coherent story. And the comic was really good for that. I think getting something that's actually out and showable as a writer is the most important thing you can do. I mean, assuming you've already developed the skills.
Yeah. Oh, and I definitely agree with you there. While, getting in the last year and a half or so and starting to get out myself and getting out and doing these different festivals and Comic-Cons and stuff like that, and showcasing my writing, and not only just showcasing my writing, but meeting the people that are reading my stuff face to face has been a huge thing, because it gives, it's showing, the personality behind the writing, I guess, if you want to say.
Yeah.
But it's also helped me, I think, in a lot of ways in developing my writing. I don't want to say so much tailoring it to the people that are writing, but being more mindful of the fact, the different people that are checking my stuff out, and being able to kind of take that and go with it, and just it's another layer in your development as somebody that creates, I guess, would be the...
Yeah, and that's how you met Shane Grant, right?
Yes, that's how I met Shane.
And he's going to be adapting one of your stories.
Yep, they reached their funding goal for the effects and such, and everything, the little bit they needed to help kind of push it over the top for what they really want to do with it. So they reached the goal, and they're going to be starting shooting sometime in early September. I'm just waiting for Shane to give me a date so I can go down and film my cameo. And
oh, that's awesome!
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. I've all I get to do my one line, and so I'm very excited to go down and just kind of check out the whole process.
And this is the first thing you've had adapted?
Yep, this will be the first of my...
that's exciting.
I've had a few people that have, kind of been interested in the past, but it's never really panned out, or, so this is my first thing that's actually getting done, so I'm very excited about it.
Oh, that's great.
And it's weird, because out of everything that I've written, this was really the one I probably least expected to get made into something. So I have other stories that were actually adapted from short screenplays that I wrote, and I never did anything with them. So I turned around and changed them into short stories. Actually, in my anthology Legend of North Lake, there is, I think, 3 stories in that were originally screenplays. The main story, Legend of North Lake, which is the Bigfoot story. I have a story called Teenage Zombies in Love, which was supposed to be like a Grease meets Night of the Living Dead musical. It was very ambitious, so I think at the time it was one of the...
It made sense in my head.
It made complete... I even wrote the song, because I'm also a musician. I also wrote the songs and everything for it, and I actually attempted at one point in time to get people together to shoot it, and I didn't realize the scale and scope of the amount of people I would need to really make it happen. And we did so much as like a walkthrough reading type thing with a bunch of us, and took some promo pictures of people dressed up in like the 60s garb and the 50s, 60s garb, and there was another story in there called Uni, that was actually something I wrote as a little kid, as like a flip picture book, and I threw that in there. But yeah, so it's just weird how those doors open up. The doors for me have opened up, because originally I kind of wanted to write screenplays. I wasn't necessarily wanting to write books, though I've written since I was a kid. I've always written, and I just stopped for a long time because I was doing music and I didn't have the time to put into it because, you know, as you know, writing is a very tedious and time-consuming process. So I decided that I wasn't going to really be able to do the screenwriting thing the way that I wanted to. So when I got back into writing, I just decided to start doing stories. And it's kind of weird that because of that, it's opened up the doors for the, you know, the stuff being adapted into film type thing. So yeah, the doors open in mysterious ways sometimes to what we want to do, I guess.
Yeah, and especially in the indie world, being able to get something that goes down as a writer that you don't also direct is really hard.
Yeah.
Because most directors write their own stuff, at least in indies.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No.
There are very few times, I don't know that I've ever really seen someone looking for a script for an indie stuff. I mean, it's usually the director has an idea and they write it.
And
so it's there are very limited opportunities unless you also want to be a director.
I see now. I've run into that recently. I have a couple of the short screenplays that I wrote that I never actually turned into stories. I've been meaning to, but I've never gotten around to. Excuse me. And I went back around and I kind of refreshed them a little bit with my newfound knowledge of how to structure a story and, you know, all that stuff. As I've done more of it, I've gotten better, and I feel like now, so I went back and kind of touched them up a little bit. I've gotten a lot better at writing dialogue. Dialogue has always been a difficult thing for me because you want it to sound natural and you want it to flow, and you don't want to tell the story through the dialogue. You know, you want it to be part of the story, but you know, so and honestly, story writing and screenplay writing are two different things. So,
well, yeah, oh, totally. Anytime you jump to another medium, it's a completely different skill set you have to learn.
Oh yeah,
going from when I first wanted to adapt Escape from Jesus Island. The first time through, I wrote it as a single graphic novel. We were going to put it out as one book. And then just the decision to go to an 8-issue series instead of one book meant I had to learn episodic comic book storytelling, which was a very different thing than telling it in one. You know, you can't just cut a script into 8 pieces.
Right, because you're going to have a beginning, middle, and end to each.
Right, each has to stand on its own and have its own arcs and everything. So any change to a different medium comes with a whole new set of challenges, and there's always stuff you didn't even see coming in. And that's why I think I've done so many different things, and I haven't spent a lot of times doing a thing a third or a fourth time.
Right.
I just kind of do it a couple times, and then I go to the next big challenge. But like video games, writing video games are completely different from any other type of writing I've done. Because normally when you're breaking down a story, you have you examine a lot of possibilities. But at the end of the day, you're picking one, and that becomes the real story, and that's the one you write.
Right.
In video games, every possibility is the real one.
So you have to write multiple arcs for each one.
Everything that can happen does, and you have to look at every path as being the path, because for the player who goes down it, it is. And the intersection of all those paths have to hold up because that's the whole player's experience. But what goes on behind the scenes to kind of thread that stuff together in a way that makes it seamless from the player side can make your brain bleed.
Oh, I'm sure. Especially on something of that scale. Now, when you're working with other writers on putting this stuff together, are you kind of do you think it's a hindrance or a help being able to, can you bounce ideas off them and say, you know, I'm thinking about doing this arc and this arc for this possibility, or is it more like a controlled thing for each person developing their thing?
When I came in, there were 3 other writers who had already been there, and early on especially, it was super helpful, because even just trying to get a feel for what the story world is and what characters are established and what, themes are ongoing and that sort of stuff can really be overwhelming. But for the past 6 months, it's just been me writing it.
Okay.
So I had all this great material that had been created by these other writers that I had to then take and kind of build into a story world, creating as much overlap as I can and expanding onto some of the things that they'd already created. So it's two very different experiences. Early on, it was the kind of group collaboration with figuring out which stories each of us were going to be doing, and lately it's been mostly just me cranking through the pieces that are essential for the early access launch, because everything in the game is wrapped in story.
Right.
If you're upgrading an expansion for your tavern, that's a quest. If you're unlocking a new food item, that's a quest. So everything are just these stories ranging from little one-off stuff to these giant sprawling epics that can play out a million different ways.
So you aren't necessarily like a lot of games where you just go in and I'm spending 500 gold to upgrade my tavern. You actually are being made to do stuff to achieve that. Those upgrades.
Yes.
That's cool. See, I like that concept.
And it can go horribly wrong. Trying to fix one thing can cause another problem if you fail that quest.
Right. It collapses in upon itself.
Oh yeah, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff where just kind of the series of horrible errors. Because that's what's fun about having to write every thread, is every now and then you have to write something for if the characters failed at quest 1, failed at quest 2, and then critically failed at quest 3. So you're writing, some really just kind of weird situations for the most abysmal failures that a party can really achieve, as well as, the greatest successes, and everything in between.
Yeah. Now, I have a question, this is even, I'm interested in this. Now, I don't think a lot of people understand how long and how much time goes into creating a video game, or even, or a comic or a book or anything like that. They see the finished product, but they don't think about all the work that goes, the prep and the work that goes into it. How long has this whole process been going on for?
It's been in development for about 2 years now. I've been involved for the last year. So they already had the mechanics in place and some graphics, but it was a very rough version when I first started. But it was, they kind of had the mechanics, and we were just creating all the data for it. We were building all the stories and the characters and everything to occupy the story world that they constructed for us.
So it was one of those things where they had the basic engine down for what they wanted to use, but you needed to fill in the story and then kind of go from there and build off that.
Yeah, and the idea was to be able to have a bunch of different writers who can each kind of write their own stuff, their own sort of quest lines, and build it up in ways that take the most advantage of their sensibilities as a writer.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that way it gives it a little more, like we're taught, and gives you a little more diversity, and it gives you different perspectives, and
Yeah, and some writers like doing the little kind of quick, funny, quirky stuff, whereas I love digging into these crazy, complex, branching storyline things that make me hate my life until the final pieces click into place, and then it's the best thing ever.
No,
It's
right. So I have a question though. Now, have you thought of the possibility of turning Escape from Jesus Island into a RPG video game?
Oh yeah, it'll happen at some point.
I think it would be a good. I'm thinking like action RPG would be perfect for that. Not maybe so.
It would be amazing.
Yeah, like Breath of Fire type.
Even just like a Doom.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Or
slap Jesus Island graphics onto a Doom.
Oh yeah.
Like you'd be fine.
Yeah, that would.
But at some point, even if it's a small indie thing that I end up making, predominantly on my own, I'll make a game of it at some point. I'm learning enough, over this past year of just being completely immersed in video game design that it no longer feels impossible to think that I might be able to put together something on my own.
Yeah, that's another positive thing about being able to branch out into all these different fields of in the artistic world, because it eventually you learn a little from this and a little from that, and it kind of brings it all together for you to be able to look ahead to projects that you 5 or 10 years ago you might have been like, there's no way in hell that's ever going to happen. It definitely opens the doors.
Well, there are some really valuable things you learn. It forces you to be more, video game writing in particular, I mean, it forces you to be very structured in your writing, because you're writing everything in spreadsheets, which is, weird on its own. It takes a while to get used to. But now that I kind of have, I sort of like it. I think I enjoy it as much as, kind of long form narrative.
Yeah.
Because the different branching options and the way that it can play out so many different ways, and that you can, play through it multiple times and not hit the same path, even within a particular storyline. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, that would definitely be a different style of reading something like that, too. I think that would be... All I could think of is, do you remember... I think we're about the same age. You might be a little older than me, but when I was a kid, we had storybooks. It was like choose your own adventure books.
Oh yes, those are a big part of my childhood.
I used to love, I remember reading some of the ones. They were like Dungeons and Dragons ones that you could choose your own adventures and different stuff like that. So this, kind of what you're talking about almost reminds me of that sort of thing.
Oh, it's a big influence on this game. No question about it.
I always loved those. Those were such a blast,
Yeah, and structurally, video game quests are very similar to the Choose Your Own Adventure. Just from a strict mechanical standpoint. Obviously, there's a lot more flexibility and diversity in a video game,
right,
than in just a straight branching thing. But it's very much the same feel. Except of course you have random events that are playing a role in whether you succeed, as well as your decisions.
Right, that may throw you off on a different path.
Oh, certainly.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And there's influences that can change even your success rate on stuff based on how you're structuring your parties and how you're equipping stuff with them. So I mean, that's what's fun about the game, is that it doesn't have a set path. It's kind of varies and goes its own way every time you play it.
Yeah, so that right there to me tells me that you should, it should have almost unlimited replayability. If you want to keep going back through and doing different stuff, or
and we hope to continue expanding it. We have plans for a couple DLC packs, so we can add new maps and new giant quest lines and new character classes and new full dungeons, and so we want to continue. I mean, ideally, we'd love to keep making content for this game for years.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now, a game that I play quite frequently on Steam with my buddies is Company of Heroes 2. And something that they've allowed people to do is create maps, that you can download. Are you guys going to do anything like that, or are you going to keep it pretty much strictly based to the development team?
No, we would definitely love to be able to support mods. That's on the list of things that we absolutely want to get to. It's a giant list, which is why the early access becomes so important.
Right.
Because we'll kind of look at what feedback we're getting and what things people are repeatedly telling us they want to see, and then that's really going to guide at least on the order of when we kind of develop the new stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So getting on to that, getting on to the next thing I want to talk to you a little about, and we kind of touched upon a little bit, is the comic conventions. Now, I know you're at a lot of them because I always see you going to different ones, hitting different things up with the Escape from Jesus Island. Are you kind of planning on promoting Epic Tavern at some of that stuff too?
I'm not sure yet. I assume I'll probably have some sort of,
Cross
promotional materials on the table.
Yeah.
Like a card with a Steam link, that sort of thing. But I've got one coming up in September, so I guess I'll figure out before then.
Yeah. That might be a little quick turnaround time for you to do it, but
yeah, it certainly would make sense to have,
but
at least something there mentioning the
so
game.
So much of the comic nerd culture, whatever you want to call it, overlaps very much into
totally.
video games and movies and writing and comics and everything. I don't really see comic conventions as just being for comics. Not anymore. Not. Maybe they were, years ago. So going into, comic conventions, one of the things that I always find interesting is you have all the different content creators. You have cosplayers, you have movie people, you have writers, you have comic artists, you have effects people. There's just like a whole plethora of different people there that are there, with different artistic endeavors. And I know when I go to a convention, when I come out, I always feel like really reinvigorated, and I've got a whole new, I don't know, it gives me a kick in the ass to see all these other people that are putting out content and doing stuff, and it just it makes me feel like I need to work harder, I guess. Do you kind of get that same feeling?
Totally. I think, especially in the indie world where the victories can be few and far between sometimes, or at least can feel that way.
Oh, yeah.
Then we kind of feed off each other's success. Like Ben Bishop, a local artist, he's got 3 days left on a Kickstarter with Kevin Eastman, one of the co-creators of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's madness. Ben's one of us. He's he's one of the local crew.
Oh yeah.
Just kicking down doors and taking names. It's awesome.
And I always feel like that. You hear people in any artistic community. Sometimes you'll hear people that are, well, that should have been me and blah 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 blah. But I've always looked at it from the perspective, I am always stoked when I see anybody that I'm friends with, or even a casual acquaintance with, that's from the state of Maine, that's doing something awesome. I mean, that's always, to me, it's like, hell yeah, that's like, you're one of us and you're doing something. That's so great. I've never gotten the whole jealousy kind of, that thing is just, I don't know if that's just my personality, and I'm not like that, and I've always been happy when my friends succeed or people I know succeed, because I look at it like, I think it's a good thing for everybody in the long run. It gives everybody a kick in the ass. It proves to people that just because I'm from Maine and we may not be directly, we may not have direct correlation with all the industry stuff, we can still do it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And that's really the only kind of sensible approach, is being happy for other people's success. Anything other than that is just, you're really setting yourself up for just a miserable life.
Oh, yeah. You
can't be happy for people when they're successful. That's sad.
That's just, to me, that's very narcissistic. It's not, it's not productive. You spend more time going, well, that should have been me, man. That should have been me. Why they get it and I didn't? I'm better than them. And then you get that whole... I've seen it too much over the years through different things, being in bands and even writing, anything you see that stuff pop up, and I just don't get it. That's one of the other things I love about comic book conventions and horror conventions or any of that stuff. You see a lot of the same people, and you get that almost like a big family atmosphere a lot of times when you go.
It's a community.
Because you're excited. Well, I know I'm only going to see Shawn. I'm only going to see you 3 or 4 times a year. So it's exciting when I go and it's like, oh, there's Shawn, hey, we go over and shoot the shit and catch up a little bit. And it's like that with a lot of the people that I've become friends with, from going to cons and stuff. And even some of the the fans and the regulars that that come to these conventions, you almost you look forward to seeing them and catching up with them.
Oh,
and
no
chatting.
question.
It's because you see a lot of the same people, and that's one of the fun parts about these that I enjoy so much.
Well, it's also getting to talk face to face with someone who's not only like read your work, but is like really spent a lot of time studying it, and is like well versed in it, and really enjoyed the story, and can discuss it in detail. That's a rare experience for a writer.
Oh yeah,
and even for someone who's a total hermit like me, and I don't do the people thing very often.
Right.
It can be fulfilling. I mean, you walk out of the convention exhausted and usually sick for 3 days.
Con crud almost every time.
Con crud's real. But it also kind of re-energizes your spirit a bit.
Oh, for sure. It just definitely. I absolutely agree with you there, and I wish on what I kind of wish more artists and people would take chances and go to these things. I know I was hesitant to do it at first, and once I did it, because it is a big time investment, and even financially it's a big investment. But the payoff in the long run, I think, is just leaps and bounds worth doing.
Yeah, even if the sales are a complete wreck, if you're networking properly while you're there, it's still a worthwhile use of your time.
Oh, for sure.
Because you're making connections, especially in the indie world. There's in Maine in particular. I don't know much beyond that in terms of the creative communities, but there's a ton of swapping favors.
Oh,
I mean, everything is done by trading favors with people, and knowing who has what capabilities and what person can, do exactly the thing that you need done and has the skill that you need is key. Because between the kind of creative collective, there's people who can do anything in this creative community now. You just got to know who they are.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And as a writer, when I go to these comic conventions and I'm looking at all the artists that are there, that gives me a chance to look at the work they're showcasing for when it comes time for me to do, say a new book cover. I can say, well, I know Mortimer does amazing artwork, and there's something I'm looking for that style. So, because I've had a chance to talk with him a little bit at the cons, I'll hit him up, and then because he knows me, maybe we can work something out, or whatever. Or I can help him out with something, he can help me out, and I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine type thing. And you see that happen all the time, and that's one of the cool things about the whole convention scene, and because you get that FaceTime with those people and you get to know them a little bit, it does open up doors. Just to expand, a network, and once you get to know somebody, they may introduce you to somebody else, and so forth, and it just keeps building.
Yeah, and you can't go it alone. At the end of the day, you need some sort of network or some sort of community or.
I've tried going that route. It's very difficult. When I first started releasing my own stuff, I pretty much just did it on my own with absolutely no advice and no help. And boy, was that a learning experience and a train wreck. And I finally
had
a
necessary one though.
But it was necessary for me to learn,
right?
That I was better off to kind of talk to other people and get some advice, and man, what am I doing wrong, and how should I maybe approach doing this, and that definitely, and a lot of that come from the last year and a half or so of going to these conventions, and that kind of opened my eyes up to a lot of that stuff.
Well, also being able to talk to people who are dealing with some of the very specific things you're dealing with that most people in society will never encounter. Writers run into some weird situations that sometimes just being able to talk to another writer who can understand our weird language is
very much
is important.
Oh yeah, because it's its own whole thing when you're trying to break something down and explain it to somebody else. If they don't, they may kind of get the concept, but they don't know all the little nuances like you or I might know if we were talking something.
Right. Yeah.
And that definitely is a big help when you can kind of vent your frustrations about, I'm stuck on this part, I'm trying to go here and go from this arc to this arc, but I don't want to make it draw it out too long. I don't want to do this, and how can I go about developing this and making it more cohesive, and that sort of thing. The average person's going to be like, well, why don't you just do this? Well, it's not just as simple as doing point A to point. You can't just go from point A to point D. You still got B. You've got B and C, plus you've got A1, A2, B3. You've got all these little things that you've got to throw in to make it happen, so it gels together when it comes back together. And how do you do that and not make it boring, while still keeping everything engaging and relevant to the story you're trying to tell? And other writers get that. Most of them do, I think. So yeah, that's definitely a huge thing right there.
Yeah.
So I know you've been really absorbed with all this stuff, with finishing up the game, and you said you have like an 8-episode series planned out for Escape from Jesus Island, 8-issue series.
Yeah.
You guys are on issue 5 right now?
Yeah, Motorwar's working on 5 currently.
We're working on 5. So now, where you guys are an independent comic, how do you don't really go by a set schedule of when you're releasing, or do you just kind of try to get one out a year, or one out every 6 months, or?
Yeah, it's kind of whenever his schedule allows.
Yeah.
He had to take a hiatus after issue 4 to knock out a couple other paid projects just so he could keep the lights on.
Oh yeah, that's definitely understandable. It's so much.
There's not a lot of money in indie comics. I mean, we hope we can establish the intellectual property that we can make money off in the future, but the comic book itself, you can't really hope to do much more than stay afloat.
Yeah.
Oh,
I hear you.
You just hope to build something that can be profitable later.
So many things when it comes to artistic endeavors. It's a labor of love with the hopes of maybe being able to turn that into, like you said, something profitable that you can actually, rely on down the road. But I think most people that are artistic look at anything like that as a labor of love. You're doing it for that reason,
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not that we think we're going to make a bucket of money down the road. That's not what's driving us, although we obviously would love that.
Oh, any of us would.
It's that we all, kind of fell in love with the story and, want to create it so that we can, have that on our resume as this badass thing that we made that we can use to open other doors for us.
Oh, for sure. Now, I always say, and I've heard this before, it's probably not an original thought or quote by me, but I, for the life of me, can't remember where it came from, was that art blossoms when you do it for the love of art. Art suffers when you do it for the money.
Yeah, I think that's generally true, but I was totally happy as a freelance comedy writer where I was just sending jokes out I was just mailing them off and getting a check. I never saw them produced. I never saw anyone tell the jokes. I never saw them performed. it was strictly mercenary. It was just going through newspapers and writing comedy bits and sending them up, and I was totally satisfied with it. It was as mercenary as a thing could possibly be.
Right.
And I was still really totally fine with it. I enjoyed the year I spent just freelance comedy writing, just writing little bits of stuff. And obviously, it's more fulfilling if you're creating a thing you can be proud of at the end of the day.
Right.
But even just writing jokes you have no emotional attachment to send off to strangers was way more satisfying than sitting in an office somewhere,
I suppose that's true because you're still doing something you love to do.
It's still something creative and, more importantly, something I can do from home.
Right. So we're getting to like the later half of the show, and I always like to talk movies with the people that I'm talking with, and henceforth the name Average Joe's Drive-In. I've always wanted to keep this as kind of a hodgepodge mishmash of all things artistic and creative, with a slight focus on movies. And I know you're a horror. You're into the horror like I am. We lost another amazing director that directed.
Yes, we did.
This sucks. It seems like I've only done this is the 11th episode, and 2 of them have been kind of having to mention 2 of the great horror directors of period, of all time, that have created some of the most important works in horrors. In like a month and a half span, we lost George Romero, and I don't know if it was today or last night, Tobe Hooper passed away. Yeah. The man behind Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Poltergeist, and many other films.
It's obviously a giant loss. I grew up. I was born in '70, so I grew up in at kind of the height of his influence, and it's just we seem to be losing everybody from that generation. I guess it makes sense.
I think especially for people our age, we're getting to that age where the people we grew up with were our age when we were getting into it. So, they're getting up into their 70s and 80s now. And so it's starting to happen, unfortunately. But, I kind of have a funny story related to Tobe Hooper. And this is a total 80s story. So I was like maybe 4 or 5. And we didn't have a VCR yet because VCRs were still kind of pricey and new, and it was hard to get movies. But my dad would rent one every once in a while, and he brought it home for the weekend. And like I said, I was 4 or 5, so my sister probably would have been like 13 or 14. She's older than I am. So Dad rented 2 movies. He rented Flash Gordon and Poltergeist. And I remember watching Flash Gordon, and at that age, that even Flash Gordon kind of scared me a little bit, I don't know. But I remember coming in to a couple of the scenes in Poltergeist, because my sister was like, "You can't be in the room and watch this." And so I'd come in the room and I'd catch glimpses, and it traumatized. The clown scene, I remember even from a young age like that, the clown scene scared the bejesus out of me, And that,
oh yeah, totally.
And that was and at the time I believe Poltergeist was rated PG.
Yeah, sure.
And to me, that's still one of the scariest PG horror movies I have ever seen.
That's responsible for more traumatized kids than maybe any movie ever. Between
Poltergeist and It, I think that has solidified many children's fear of, many people's fear of clowns. It's just so many good jump scares and just creepy scenes in that film. And, I really think he did it with a less is more approach there.
Yes. Well, the use of suspense and the building, like with the difference between counting the gap between thunder and lightning.
Yeah.
In terms of telling when the storm is moving away, it's such a great plot device that is used so effectively when he goes back to it later and it starts getting closer and closer.
And
just great storytelling.
And that was where I think Tobe Hooper excelled, was his storytelling. The writing part of it, just being able to convey that stuff. A lot of directors aren't able to do that. They either rely on the gore or the just flat out jump scares instead of the building suspense. And even, I think a lot of people think of Texas Chainsaw Massacre as being a really gory movie, but it's not.
It's really not. It certainly feels that way.
It feels, to me, Texas Chainsaw Massacre always felt, it made me feel dirty. I guess.
Yes. I think that was mission accomplished.
It was a lot like The Hills Have Eyes. It made me feel dirty watching it. It's just like but you get that sense of dread and fear in your head, so you automatically associate it with being gory. But it really wasn't. The original, anyway. The remake was quite gory, but.
Yeah, but the original, you kind of filled in the gaps yourself, and without even realizing you were doing it.
And I think a lot of times that is more terrifying than actually seeing it on the screen.
Oh, it certainly can be if you do it right. Yeah.
But he was a great director in being able to do that with his films, and just being able to make you have to fill in the gaps on your own, and kind of. You made it out to be way worse than what he probably would have ever been able to show you on the screen.
Well, I think it's important. As an aspect of storytelling, is leaving enough empty space in the story for the reader to flesh out the pieces they want to flesh out.
Oh, for sure.
And it took me a while to kind of accept that and not fight against it. That sometimes not explaining everything is better, to kind of leave a little room for the reader to customize it in their head.
Oh yeah, and this is just kind of off subject of, it's on subject but off subject of Tobe Hooper, but it's I've had people, you get two trains of thoughts. You have the people that don't want you to do that, and then you have the people that want you to fill in every blank because they just either, I don't know if they don't have the creativity enough to fill in the blanks themselves, but they need to have it basically real straightforward and light.
Or they just love to kind of soak in the lore of a story they love too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly have stories like that I want to understand all the details. I wanted to kind of dig into the character backstories that aren't immediately apparent and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. See, and going to writers like that, Stephen King and Clive Barker are masters of telling you a story but weaving it so intricately that it doesn't feel like they're telling you everything until you get further into the story, and then you start realizing they were telling you all these things. And
right. Yes.
Those, I think they're two of the best in the horror genre of doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that's how, and I really think that's how Tobe Hooper was with his movies. I really think he was, as a director, he was able to convey that same feeling you would get from reading like a King novel or a Barker novel, and weave that same intricate web into his films.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a rough year for horror fans. It really has. It's been, especially with directors. It's like, I heard somebody say online today, is like somebody needs to wrap John Carpenter in bubble wrap.
Protect the ones we have left.
Protect the ones we have left. Unfortunately, it's a lot like the for people that grew up with the alternative music scene.
Oh, sure.
Chris Cornell, they're all gone except for Eddie Vedder.
Yeah.
So it's just been kind of a weird cycle of that. So have you? I know you said you haven't had a chance to really watch a lot of new movies. Is there anything you have checked out that you want to mention that you enjoyed?
I think the last thing I can remember seeing was Get Out, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, I
really enjoyed that.
I haven't had a chance to see it, but I've heard.
Oh, you should.
I pretty much have heard absolutely nothing but good things about that. So.
Yeah, like it's smart, kind of slow burn horror, which I love a lot.
Which I'm definitely. I was discussing this. I've discussed this with a few people on the show. As I've gotten older, I am more into the slow burn horror than I used to be when I was younger. So I appreciate those a lot more than I did. And it's made me want to go back and revisit some of the films that I was kind of a little iffy on back in the day, because I think I might enjoy them more now. Like now you go back and maybe watch some of the films you loved when you were younger, and it doesn't have the same punch. You still appreciate them, but they just don't have the same effect and punch, that they once had. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm confident that somewhere along the line, someone went and refilmed all the things I loved as a kid to make them terrible.
Yeah.
Because none of them hold up. I'm like, how did I enjoy that?
I hear you. I went through, I watched a movie the other day, and I'm actually going to do a review episode. I've been trying every few weeks to do like a review episode of things that I've watched, and I'm going to talk about it on that episode, but I watched a film called Adjust Your Tracking, which is about people that are into VHS collecting and a lot of just the community behind it. It's a really great documentary, but I watched this the other day and it kind of got me thinking, because I just recently found a box of my old VHS tapes that didn't manage to get sold on a yard sale, which I think at one time I had like 200, and I have maybe about a third of that now. And I didn't even know I still had them. They've been in a box out in my garage for like 8 years or 9 years, something like that. So it kind of rekindled the nostalgia bug of the whole VHS thing, and going to the movies. I mean, going to the video store and searching for stuff, and a lot of the crap I watched that I loved back then because of just it was cool looking artwork or whatever. And I still have a few of those movies that I bought, like when the video stores the mom and pop stores would occasionally sell off some of their stock to make room, so you could pick up some of these low budget C grade movies, for like $4 or $5, and I still have some of those, and it's kind of weird to, like, I liked them at the time, but I'm kind of curious to go back and watch some of those now and see how awful they actually are, if I'm good or if I'm still going to enjoy them, and so that's kind of one of those nostalgia things, so I'm just looking at things from a different perspective when it comes to film.
Oh yeah. And if you enjoyed Land of the Lost as a kid, don't ever go back. Don't ever rewatch it. It'll ruin everything.
Yeah, I love that show when I was a kid, and I actually
don't ever.
And I actually watched the Will Ferrell movie.
Oh yeah, that was
which really wasn't very good, but but just it kind of made me want to go back and watch it. But at the same time, then I was like, if this is this cheesy now,
it's amazing how little they hold up.
I was going to say, I can't imagine those are going to hold up very well at all.
Just enjoy your memory, because you're going to ruin it.
It's kind of the same reason why I've never gone back and watched the original Buck Rogers.
Sure.
Because I'm just absolutely horrified that I'm going to be like, what the hell? Because I have so many fond memories of that as a kid, So
that's how I feel about Beastmaster.
Oh, yes.
Love that movie. I know it wouldn't hold up.
Oh, Kodo and Kodo. Yeah, I haven't seen that one in forever. Who the hell directed that? That was somebody that was... wasn't it the guy that did Phantasm?
Was it?
Don Coscarelli. Yeah, Don Coscarelli.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was a Don Coscarelli film, so...
Yep.
I kind of want to watch it for that reason, but at the same time, I'm like, that was like a TBS staple for years.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was always on TBS. That was one of those, like, it seems like TBS for the longest time in the mid-'80s had, like, the same 5 films just on repeat. Every week you'd see the same 4 or 5 films. And
I'd watch them.
Then I'd watch them every single time because we had 10 channels. So, the early days of cables, you young children don't understand the struggle, So, but, all right, man. Well, I know you're busy and you got a lot of stuff to get finished up here for the release. But before we go, you want to just tell everybody where you can check out Escape from Jesus Island and Epic Tavern and anything else you want to plug before we let you go?
Sure. Escape from Jesus Island, you can find us on Facebook. We're also on Comixology, Amazon, many of the usual places you find comics, or you can get signed copies directly from us at JesusIslandStore.com. And Epic Tavern is the preview page is currently up on Steam right now. And it's super helpful if you can go to that and follow and wishlist us. And the game will be on sale September 7th. We're also on Twitch, where we do live broadcasts 4 or 5 days a week, kind of showing the behind-the-scenes process and talking to fans as we're, debugging stuff and working through various things. So the whole process is super transparent if you're ever curious on what goes into making a game.
That's very cool, man. All right, well, once again, thank you very much for coming on and chatting with me for a while, and we'll definitely do it again.
Totally.
I am your host, TJ Washburn, and you have been listening to Average Joe's Drive-In. Please hit us up on Facebook. You can also check out my website, thomaswashburnjr.com. Has links to all my books, and I've also got I've also got a link to Average Joe's Drive-In there. And I will see you sexy animals on the flip side.
Bye-bye.